Welcome back. Time for the power rankings. Before I start, yesterday we lost one of our pets. The plan was I'm just going to have this on the set at the new house after we've done the move. And she's the one here. So there's these custom ads that show up on Facebook, and so my wife ordered me this for my birthday last week, and I was looking forward to putting this up. So you got Bear, Shadow, Pixel, and Lilybell, and I've been wearing the T-shirt too that I have that has all four cats on it too, because the custom stuff, I'm old, so the custom stuff's kind of fun. So I still intend to have that on the new set. I just wanted to talk about it at the start of the power rankings for tonight. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the power rankings from here. And again, thank you for the support and the well wishes that I've seen pouring in via email, messages, and other things. So thank you guys so much. Means a lot. Number 32 on this week's power rankings. Why change it? It's Montreal. So Montreal, they did win their first game under Marty St. Louis. There is reason to believe that Cole Caulfield is finally getting things rolling. People who said Caulfield was a bust may very well end up being proven wrong, because it's still his first full year in the NHL. So I find that so weird. People want to label a guy a bust in this first full year. Number 31, dropping one spot from where they were last week, the Arizona Coyotes. For Arizona, the blowing that lead against LA tonight was, LA's in the hunt for a playoff spot, but not being able to hold leads. Again, if you're in the bottom row, you're out of the running for a playoff spot anyways. So it's kind of splitting hairs to have them 31st, down one spot. In 30th, also down one spot from where they were last week, Philadelphia. For the Flyers, the miserable season, the record just keeps getting uglier. Like, looking at their record, and there are some really ugly records in the NHL, and theirs is just flat out not good. And so for Philadelphia, they're looking forward to getting the deadline past them, getting this year done, and then moving forward into next year, probably pretending most of this season didn't happen. Number 29, dropping one spot from where they were last week, the New Jersey Devils. Devils, again, their season is basically finished at this point. We're playing it out. I can't remember a year where this early in the season we're seeing so many teams that, well, they're probably done for now. This is probably it for this season for them. They can look forward to next season. There won't be any playoffs this year. I can't remember seeing so many teams that were that far below the playoff line this early in the season. So New Jersey is one of them. Number 28, moving up 3 spots from where they were last week. I did not lose the puck for them. Buffalo. As Buffalo fans would have been thinking, well, wait, where are we? We were 31st last week. Buffalo had a good week. Even in that loss today against the Colorado Avalanche, they played well. They gave Colorado a really good run for their money. So for me, I think Buffalo is playing better than some of the other teams on this board. And we'll see whether or not that stays the case in future weeks. But for right now, I have them in 28th. I think Alex Tuch has been fantastic for Buffalo. There is reason for hope for the future. And I think that they've got a half-decent team going forward. And again, they're going to be adding another draft pick. There's going to be Owen Power coming in. This team could be pretty good next year. Number 27. I know you guys, if you're Buffalo fans, you've heard that before. And I apologize. Number 27, dropping one spot from where they were last week, Seattle. Good game tonight against Calgary. Overall, kind of, sort of. Grubauer's numbers, better on some nights than on others. But really, for Seattle, it's just if they're getting the goaltending, they're not getting the scoring. If they're getting the scoring, they're not getting the defense. If everything seems to be going all right, the goaltending tends to lapse. It's just been one thing after another for Seattle. So I have them in 27th on the board overall. They basically switched spots with the team that was 27th last week. That is Chicago. So with the schedule being as light as it's been, there hasn't been as much movement as you would normally see, except for there are a couple of teams that are doing very well, making up the games that they had in hand during this 3-week period. Chicago has looked good at times, and so they end up moving up to 26 from 27. They've been out of the bottom row. They may get out of the bottom row again, but at this point, I have them 26th. Number 25, dropping one spot from where they were last week as well. Again, really small changes, and that's Columbus. So Columbus is back into the bottom row. And I debated about whether or not to have Columbus or Chicago in. So I just said, well, Columbus, if they've beaten Chicago, so I'll have Columbus ahead of Chicago. But at this point, you could make the argument for Chicago ahead of Columbus despite the loss. You could do that. And teams in this bottom row, there are positives with almost everybody now, just not playoffs on the horizon. Columbus isn't out, obviously, but they're not winning games often enough that you can say, hey, they're really closing in on the Bruins or the Capitals. Moving on to the next row, number 24, moving up one spot from last week is Ottawa. Ottawa's playing well, and the thing with Ottawa, too, is that it feels like as injuries start to take over, they get better. It's like without Batherson, things they started playing better. And there's this determination by the guys who are filling in to prove, hey, we're NHLers too. This is a team that's played pretty well under the circumstances. Again, they're out of the playoffs. They're selling at the deadline. But there is some good for the future. Stützle hit 10 goals tonight. There are positives, and their goaltending's been a positive too. So if they decide to move a goalie at the deadline, if it's Forsberg, that wouldn't necessarily surprise me. But if they decide to keep their goaltending as is, that wouldn't really surprise me either. Their goaltending's been pretty good for the last, 6 weeks? Next up, number 23, same as last week, the New York Islanders. So the Islanders, there's been setbacks. They're below 500. They're also in the realm of teams that aren't likely to make it to the playoffs. They did have the one nice win over Boston. But again, they're below 500. They had a rough week overall. If not for that win over Boston, they might have ended up in the bottom row. So for the Islanders, they're trying to keep themselves afloat. Number 22, Detroit. So they stay in the same spot they were last week as well. They get a win over the New York Rangers in a shootout, right? So yeah, for the Detroit Red Wings, pretty okay week. But again, they find themselves pretty far out of the playoffs. I know that there's still hope that Boston might lose, and I think I mentioned this last week too. I still think a lot of that is because people just don't like Boston, which I get. But we'll see whether or not Detroit can get things going. Raymond's playing well. Sider's playing well. Larkin's been scoring at above a point per game. And now it feels like Greiss is out playing Nedeljkovic, so there might be a bit of a battle there. And so do you try to keep Greiss for next year then, or do you let Nedeljkovic still run with it, or do you bring somebody else in, or what are they going to do? All right. Next up, dropping one spot from last week, 21 this week, is San Jose. So for the Sharks, the loss at home against Vancouver, that hurt them. And they're just, again, there's not a lot of games being played by some of these teams, so there's not a lot to go on. But that game against the Canucks, yeah. And so they end up dropping to 21 because at 20, moving up one spot from last week, and they don't move up further based on tonight's result, and that's Vancouver. For Vancouver, they were just about to get 3 games above 500, and then tonight against Anaheim, that does not happen. So they're back to 1 game above 500. And if they keep doing that, there won't be playoffs in their future. Even with a win tonight to get them 3 games above 500, the playoffs are kind of a pipe dream, but still, they're above 500, so we'll see. But all indications are that they're planning to sell at the deadline. I haven't seen anything with this team that tells me they shouldn't at least think about it, because prices could be pretty high for the players that might want to sell, and it makes it too attractive not to, right? Number 18, dropping 3 spots from last week. Number 19 is Anaheim. I lost my spot on my book here. Anaheim had a rough week. They salvaged something by beating Vancouver tonight. In that game, the Vancouver was nice enough to just play really poorly in the first period. And so Anaheim rode it from there. They get 7 goals. And it makes up for rough nights in Alberta. Really rough nights in Alberta that took them outside of the playoffs. But with that win tonight, now if they can get things rolling again, they can get themselves back into maybe a playoff spot. Maybe target the Kings as the team that they're after if the Oilers and the Flames are going to keep winning. So yeah, we'll see how things go for Anaheim. But that win tonight kept them from being lower on the chart. If Vancouver had beaten Anaheim, would have been ahead of Anaheim. And Anaheim probably would have been below San Jose as well. Just, it's been, I think coming into tonight, I think they were winless in 4. So that would have been winless in 5. All right, next up. 18, moving up one spot from last week, is Winnipeg. Would have moved up further. The loss against Edmonton hurt. They did win back-to-back games before this, though, so no reason to panic. However, their odds of making the playoffs are hovering at around 20%. So for Winnipeg, they may very well see themselves as sellers at the deadline, too. It is quite possible, and again, because the market prices are going to be probably pretty high, it may be too tempting not to sell off at least one asset for some of these teams. And it may be one of those situations like, and I mentioned this before, St. Louis selling off Shattenkirk did not fall out of the playoffs. It was just the price that they could get that for that asset was high enough that they were like, yeah, let's do it, without mailing in the rest of the season. So we may see teams doing that as well. Number 17, same spot as last week, Washington. So for the Capitals, and again, a lot of these teams aren't playing very much. I know the Capitals are in that situation as well. The Caps would have moved up this week, except for the team that they would have bumped out of the top 16. They got a win tonight. They've managed to get some points, so they keep their spot in the top 16, but just barely. So Washington may very well find themselves top 16 next week. Number 16, getting through the first half of the board and into the second half, Boston. The Boston Bruins dropped 3 spots from last week. The alarming difference in scoring between with Marchand and without, it's alarming. It's distressing because it shows that Boston really doesn't have the depth to make up for losing one of their top guys. And Bergeron, when he was out as well, you can just see this huge difference in their scoring. They even talked about it tonight, and without Marchand in the lineup, their goals per game is something like 1.25, something like that, and their goals against is still good, but they just don't score. So it affects their power play, it affects their penalty kill, and it reminds you that Boston might be one injury away from being kind of an easy out in the playoffs. I still think they get there, but I have some doubts in the playoffs with Boston, and their recent play hasn't been fantastic either. There was the discussion too during the Ottawa game about how well Boston doesn't have anybody pushing them, so it might be harder to get motivated every night, which I would buy if other teams ahead of them didn't feel plenty of motivation. So the motivation argument, it's a little bit of a slippery slope for me. Number 15, same spot they were last week, Dallas. They had a huge win. Yep, they had a huge win over Colorado, where they got outplayed badly. They win in a shootout over Chicago. I think Ottinger had a fantastic week. I don't know that the Dallas Stars did. I think the Dallas Stars had an okay week. I think 15th is the right spot for them. I think Ottinger was fantastic. So we shall see if the scoring is going to start to pick up again. And again, the Robertson, Hintz, Pavelski line's fantastic. They need more from the other lines as well. So for Dallas, they're in the top 16. I think they've got a good shot of making the playoffs now with the way things have been going lately. And again, a lot of it is that top line. They could drag this team into the playoffs. Plus, Jake Ottinger, absolutely fantastic. If he can keep that up, things look good. So they're the highest rated team that is in my top 3. So they're 15, 16, and 20. It's mildly depressing. All right, number 14 on the board, dropping 2 spots from last week, is Nashville. Now, people have started talking about Nashville. Nashville's lost 4 in a row. They have dropped on my board from where they were before the 4-game losing streak. I don't find it that alarming. I think losing against Carolina, that's to be expected. Carolina, and they could have won that game against Carolina. That really could have gone either way at certain times, and then Carolina gets the victory. So Nashville, I still think they make the playoffs. They're 8 points above the line. I think they're 8. Are they 6 points above? They're not likely to drop out. But yeah, Nashville, rough week for them overall. I think they bounce back next week, so I didn't bump them down too much for their losses. Next up, number 13, moving up 1 spot from where they were last week. It's a cautious move up for the Kings. They win against Vegas. Then they win the next night in Arizona, which of course was tonight. And the Kings are in pretty good shape. They've been playing really well. Danault looks fantastic. Philippe Danault's having the best season offensively he's ever had. So that says a lot for the Kings and the intelligence Rob Blake has shown in putting this roster together and figuring out who to pick up and who to let go. And Durzi's been really good. And, you know, even though their goaltending's had some rough nights here and there, like tonight, Peterson wasn't great, but they win the game. And that's one of the keys to being a playoff team is when your goalie has an off night, you bail him out, you win the game. And the Kings have shown they're capable of doing that. Something they struggled with last year when the Kings really couldn't score goals. Next up, number 13 on the board, or number 12 on the board, I should say, dropping one spot from where they were last week. Vegas. Up and down week for Vegas. They obviously lose against the Kings. I thought about having them 13th and the Kings 12th. If you want to do that, you can Photoshop it so that they're in reverse spots. Sure, it doesn't bother me. But for Vegas, I didn't feel like they necessarily needed to drop further than 12th. And again, there aren't that many games being played right now by most teams. So Vegas drops the one spot. We'll see in the upcoming weeks, especially once we get to next Saturday, where we get back into a full regular schedule after, the break is done. The break where the break was supposed to be, right? We'll see how that works out, and we'll probably see more movement on the board. But Vegas drops the one spot this week. Number 11. Boy, if you're going to make up games you have in hand, you want to win all of them. And there's a couple of teams in Alberta that are doing that. And so moving up 7 spots from last week, the Oilers. The biggest mover on the board this week. I thought about wearing Oilers. Here's the reason why I didn't. I have worn Oilers jerseys a lot lately. So I felt like, for the power rankings, I don't necessarily need to wear Oilers. I'm wearing them a ton because they win a lot of games. And I wore an Oilers jersey earlier today for their win against Winnipeg in the video I did for that game. So the Oilers have been playing very, very well. They are probably the most extreme team in the league when it comes to red hot and ice cold. And it's a switch they can turn on and turn off seemingly at will, which has to frustrate people in charge of that team. So under their brand new coach, they're now 5-0. It's been an incredible run. I wouldn't be that surprised if they have some kind of a fall off too, though. But they should be a playoff team. This is a team that absolutely should be a playoff team. And of course, the question mark in net is still there. But I don't think it's screaming as loudly now as it was. I think that winning does a lot to fix the perceived problems the team has. And for the Oilers, there's been a lot of winning. Number 10, dropping one spot from last week. They've been winning. And then they went against Toronto and they lost 4-1. And so Pittsburgh drops. And here's why. And I'm going to do something unusual here. I'm going to show both teams at the same time. Number 9 moving up one spot is St. Louis. And so what it comes down to is they both had decent weeks. Pittsburgh loses against Toronto. St. Louis wins against Toronto. I thought St. Louis looked really good in that win against Toronto. And Pittsburgh, I didn't think looked as good. So I went, all right. So based on that, I'll have St. Louis in 9th and Pittsburgh in 10th. So I understand Pittsburgh, they've won a lot of games lately. There's a lot of teams with gaudy records. St. Louis is also one of those teams with gaudy records. And so we'll see over the next few weeks who drops out of the top 8. Because somebody's going to drop out of the top 8. There's always somebody who's ready to drop out of the top 8. Although this week, the one team that drops out of the top 8 is technically... No, actually, that's not true. I was looking at last week's. I was like, no, nobody dropped out of the top 8 this week. But there's a team that could. So St. Louis dropped out of the top 8 last week. Nobody drops out of the top 8 this week. Dropping 4 spots from where they were last week is Minnesota. One thing about being at the top of this board is it's relatively easy if you lose a few games to drop. For me to say, okay, this team's lost a few games, they'll drop. Just like Buffalo has a good week and they move up a few spots. And so it's easier to move up here. It's easier to move down here, right? So that's kind of how I've always done the power rankings since I stopped being reactionary with them. And so Minnesota is 8th right now. It's possible they move back up, but they had a couple of tough losses this week. And so we shall see how they bounce back from that loss last night against Florida, for example, right? Next up on the board, number 7, dropping one spot from where they were last week, is Toronto. So Toronto, good week. They had a good week. I leave them ahead of Minnesota. I feel like they're in the right spot on the board right now. There's one team that... Well, there's 2 teams that passed them because they passed Minnesota. There's one team that's on a heater right now. And so that's why Toronto ends up dropping more than anything. The one team that they switch spots with, who move up one spot from where they were last week, is the New York Rangers. So what's happened is Minnesota's dropped from 4th to 8th, Toronto's dropped to 7th, and the Rangers passed them. Now, how much of this is Shesterkin? Probably a decent amount. However, the New York Rangers, good week. And again, they're getting their points. They're up near the top of their division. And so, yeah, based on the loss for Toronto, I know there was the shootout loss for the Rangers, but so I just flipped them, just switched them around. And again, when there's not that many games during any given week, it does make it a little bit tougher. So yeah, the Rangers are 6th right now. We shall see if they hold that spot next week. Number 5, moving up 3 spots from where they were last week. So they cruised 6 spots to number 8 last week. They move up 3 spots this week. So they moved up 9 spots in the last 2 weeks. And that's Calgary. Now here's the thing. So before this winning streak, there was a lot of talk about the disappointment and what does Calgary need to do. They probably need to add some depth. They could probably use a defenseman, and they probably need to change things up. They go on this 9-game winning streak, and now those articles have become, the Flames have proven they're a contender. I think the reality is this is a team that's very good right now. They're on this really good hot streak. Obviously, they're going to start losing games at some point again during this season. And the reality is going to be revealed in the playoffs. This team can win 50 games during the regular season. They can get 110 points. But if they lose in the first round, they're going to be known as a very good regular season team, right? And there'll still be those questions there. So adding Toffoli could be huge. He had a goal in the first game for them. Hasn't had a goal in the other 2, but he hasn't needed to. They're on a 9-game winning streak. Markstrom's looked excellent. Vladar's looked excellent when he's been in. And so Calgary makes a huge move up. Both Calgary and Edmonton, a lot of games over the last couple of weeks, and they're winning them all. So that's why they're jumping up past other teams. Because of the games in hand, we knew that there was going to be a large market correction one way or the other if somebody went on a hot streak or a cold streak. Could have gone the other way. If Calgary had lost 9 in a row, they'd be down in this area, right? All right, next up, number 4, moving up 1 spot from last week, Carolina. The Canes are just, they're really remarkably consistent. And even in games they don't win, they're usually pretty good. And you can pinpoint where they lose games because they're really pretty good in every game. They clearly play well for Rod Brind'Amour. Freddie Anderson's having a better season than I think most people may realize. And I think he's probably going to garner at least some attention for the Vezina. I don't think he wins it, but I think he'll get some attention. And really, Carolina has been fantastic through most of this season, as have a number of teams. As I did the video about parity and how it seems like there's not really much parity this year, it's true. However, the one thing that I could say is that these top 8 teams, I think any of them could go on a run in the playoffs. And I'd go as far as to say St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Edmonton, Vegas, right, with the addition of Eichel and what Vegas might be able to do in the playoffs. You could make an argument that LA, with the core that they have, they could go on a run. Nashville, they went on a run in 2017. Dallas went on a run in 2020. Boston was in the finals in 2019. The Capitals won it in 2018. Yeah, I could keep going. There are a lot of teams right now that if you believe your team can win, good for you. They might. Number 3 on the board is Tampa. Tampa Bay Lightning, number 3. And again, not playing a lot. They didn't have as many delayed games because of the COVID shutdowns we went through in December and January. And so they weren't as adversely affected as some other teams. So there's not a lot to go on with them. So yeah, Tampa stays in 3rd place. Number 2, same spot they were last week as well, Florida. For the Florida Panthers, remarkable how they score at will. They make it look easy. They really do. It really, when you watch a Florida game, you would swear you're watching the video game, any of the NHL games, and that they're playing on maybe sophomore, maybe rookie, right? So maybe rookie status or semi-pro or whatever. I'm trying to think of intermediate. No. Anyways, you guys know what I'm talking about if you play the NHL games. But yeah, if you watch their games, you'd be forgiven for thinking, are they playing this on rookie? They're not playing this on Superstar because this is way too easy. And against a Minnesota team that's really quite good. And they spanked them. Once they got the momentum, that's it. It's over. And Florida games are like that. I can watch them and go, okay, so they're probably going to lose this. Nope. Game's over. Never mind. They won again. So Florida's able to do that. It's been fantastic to watch. They're second. The team that's first, again, is Colorado. Not a fantastic week. They did lose the game against Dallas. They outplayed Dallas badly in that game. They did. They outplayed Dallas really badly in that game. And I felt like, since this is their first loss in regulation since 1998, yeah, so they stay at number one. But if they had lost that game against Buffalo today, Florida would have passed them. Florida, I would have swapped the two. And I had that in my mind that last night after what Florida did to Minnesota, that in the event that Colorado lost against Buffalo, I was going to switch them, and Florida was going to be number one. So Florida's very, very close. Closer this week, I think, than they were last week. But by the numbers, they're still number two. So there you go. Power rankings for February 19th. A little earlier than normal because there weren't as many games, and none of them started at 7:30 Pacific. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happen upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.